Anakin's nightmares had become more intense with each passing night. He saw Padme lying on a table, gasping for breath, desperately trying to hold on to the life slipping away from her as she gave birth. The sound of a baby's cry echoed in the distance, but it always disappeared before he could reach it. His hands trembled as he tried to hold her, but she always crumbled in his hands like stardust. The weight of helplessness crushed his chest as if the entire galaxy were pressing down on him. When he woke up once again in a cold sweat, Anakin got up quietly, careful not to wake Padme, who was sleeping peacefully beside him. The sight of her breathing softly should have brought him comfort, but it only intensified the terror growing inside him. He walked out onto the balcony of Padme's quarters, letting the night breeze of Coruscant touch his face. The lights of the planet city shone in the distance, thousands of points of light that seemed indifferent to the torment he carried. Anakin knelt, closing his eyes and trying to find peace through meditation, something Obi-Wan always insisted he should do more often. He took a deep breath, seeking calm in the center of the storm that was his mind. The Force flowed around him, but this time there was something different, something pulling his consciousness away. It was as if invisible fingers grabbed him and dragged him through a corridor of light and darkness. Before he could resist or understand, he felt solid ground beneath his feet again. When he opened his eyes, Anakin was no longer on the balcony. He was in a metallic corridor, lit by cold white lights that hummed softly above his head. The design was unlike any ship he knew, more angular and functional, less elegant than the Republic cruisers. His hand instinctively went to the lightsaber on his belt as he tried to process where he was and how he had gotten there. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, coming quickly toward him, accompanied by heavy breathing. 3 figures came running around the corner, a tall man in a sleeveless vest with a blaster in his hand, a young woman dressed in white with an elaborate hairstyle, and a young man in simple farmer's clothes. They stopped abruptly when they saw Anakin blocking the corridor. The man in the vest immediately pointed his blaster at Anakin, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and urgency. "Get out of the way, man!" he shouted, his tone a mixture of impatience and determination. Anakin raised his hands slightly, but his posture was confident, not submissive. "Where am I? What is this place?" he asked, his voice firm but confused. The man with the blaster didn't answer, only gestured aggressively with his weapon. "I said get out of the way. We have Imperials on our tail." Anakin felt his patience rapidly wearing thin. His eyes flashed with determination as he took a step forward. "Put that gun down. It's useless against me. I'm a Jedi." The man in the vest let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Don't give me that Jedi crap. There's no such thing, buddy. The Jedi are ancient history, legends to scare children." His words angered Anakin even more, but before he could respond, the sound of military boots echoed from across the hallway. 3 soldiers in white armor appeared, their weapons already firing bursts of red energy at the group. Instinctively, Anakin drew his lightsaber, the bright blue blade appearing with its characteristic hum. He moved with the grace of a trained dancer, his saber spinning in precise arcs that deflected the shots back at the soldiers. Within seconds, the 3 stormtroopers fell to the ground, struck by their own reflected shots. The ensuing silence was broken by the young man's admiring voice. "He really is a Jedi," Luke exclaimed, his blue eyes wide with wonder and something that looked like recognition. He stepped forward, passing Han, who was still holding the blaster, now pointed downward. The boy extended his hand to Anakin, a genuine smile lighting up his young face that carried an innocence Anakin recognized from his own past. There was something in the way the boy looked at him, a familiarity that Anakin couldn't explain, as if he were looking into a mirror distorted by time. "My name is Luke Skywalker." Anakin's hand trembled slightly as he reached out to shake the boy's, and the name echoed in his mind like a distant bell. Skywalker, his surname. How was that possible? Anakin stood completely frozen, his hand still holding Luke's, his eyes fixed on the young man's face as if trying to decipher an impossible riddle. "Skywalker? Where are you from? Who are your parents?" he asked, his voice coming out more urgent than he intended. Luke opened his mouth to reply, but Han interrupted abruptly, putting his blaster back in its holster. "Hey, we don't have time for this reunion. Obi-Wan must be in trouble, and we need to get him out of here before more Imperials show up." The mention of his master's name made Anakin shift his attention away from the young Skywalker. "Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan Kenobi is here?" he asked, his voice mixing surprise and relief. Luke nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, you know him? He was helping us rescue Princess Leia from the Empire." Leia, the young woman in white, looked at Anakin with a mixture of curiosity and impatience, her brown eyes shining with determination. "We have to go now," Leia insisted, her voice carrying natural authority despite her youth. Something about her reminded Anakin of Padme, the same strength of will and courage that did not bow to danger. The four of them rushed through the corridors of the space station, Anakin following the group as his mind worked frantically to understand what was happening. The station's design, the soldiers' armor, the absence of other Jedi, everything indicated that something was terribly wrong. They turned a corner and came to an elevated platform overlooking a large hangar. Below, two figures faced each other, their lightsabers buzzing in the tension-filled air. One wore weathered brown robes, the other was completely covered in intimidating black armor with a cape flowing behind him. "Who are they?" Anakin asked, pointing at the figures. Luke leaned over the railing, his fists clenching. "It's Obi-Wan Kenobi fighting Darth Vader, one of the Empire's worst servants." Anakin watched the man in brown robes, studying his movements, the way he held his saber. There was something familiar about them, but the man was much older, with white hair and a long beard. Then the man turned slightly, and Anakin saw his face. It was Obi-Wan, decades older, the lines of time etched deeply into his features, but unmistakably his master. A chill ran down his spine as reality began to form in his mind. He wasn't just in another place, he was in another time. The Force had thrown him into the future. It was at that moment that the figure in black armor, Darth Vader, sensed Anakin's presence. The Sith Lord stopped in the middle of his attack, his head turning sharply toward the platform where Anakin stood. Even through the mask, Anakin could feel the absolute shock emanating from him, a wave of emotion so intense in the Force that it made the air around them tremble. "How can this be?" Vader's mechanized voice echoed through the hangar, laden with disbelief and something that sounded like terror. Obi-Wan took advantage of his opponent's distraction to look in the same direction, and when his eyes landed on Anakin, the old Jedi seemed to age 10 years in an instant. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and his lightsaber nearly fell from his hand. The face of his former Padawan was unmistakable. Anakin looked back at his master, and even through the decades that separated them, even through the wrinkles and white beard, he recognized those eyes. They were the same eyes that had watched him grow from a slave boy to a Jedi Knight, the same eyes that had glowed with pride when he performed a difficult maneuver, the same eyes that had narrowed in disapproval when his impulsiveness had put him in danger. "Master," Anakin whispered, even though he knew Obi-Wan couldn't hear him from that distance. But the old Jedi nodded slightly, as if he had heard him anyway. Obi-Wan then looked back at Vader, who remained frozen, and something passed between the two combatants. A silent communication that Anakin couldn't decipher. The old Jedi seemed to have made a decision. Obi-Wan turned completely toward Anakin, ignoring Vader behind him. A soft, sad smile appeared on his aged face, carrying decades of regret and hope. He raised his saber in a final salute, a gesture Anakin recognized from countless trainings and battles they had shared. "May the Force be with you, my friend." Obi-Wan's voice echoed clearly through the Force, reaching Anakin directly in his mind. Before Anakin could respond, before he could shout at his master not to do what he was about to do, Vader struck. But the red saber found only air and fabric. Obi-Wan had vanished, his clothes falling empty to the floor along with his lightsaber. Luke screamed, "No!" beside Anakin, his voice breaking in despair and disbelief. Han pulled Luke by the arm, his urgent voice cutting through the shock. "Let's go. We have to go now." Leia was already running back down the corridor, tears streaming silently down her face as she maintained her composure. Luke resisted for a moment, staring at where Obi-Wan had been seconds before, but Han pulled him harder. The three began to run, but Anakin remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the figure in black armor below. Vader stood beside Obi-Wan's empty clothes, his gloved hand touching the fabric with something that looked like reverence or remorse. Then he raised his head, and his invisible eyes met Anakin's again. Han stopped and looked back. "Hey Jedi, let's go." But Anakin shook his head slowly, his hand already moving toward his lightsaber. His voice came out calm, but laden with steely determination. "No, I'm staying." Luke, Leia, and Han ran off, their footsteps echoing farther and farther away down the corridors as Anakin began to slowly descend into the hangar. His eyes never left the figure of Vader, who stood up and turned to face him completely. There was something disturbing about that presence, a suffocating darkness that seemed to suck the light around it, but also something terribly familiar that made every fiber of Anakin's being vibrate in recognition. He ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade glowing brightly in the dim light of the hangar, and began walking toward the Sith Lord with fury growing in his heart. This being had killed his master, or at least had been present when Obi-Wan chose to disappear. No matter what it was, Anakin would make it pay. His march was determined, each step measured and filled with lethal intent. Vader raised a gloved hand in a gesture of pause, his mechanical breathing filling the silence between them. "Wait, you don't want to face me." The distorted voice was calm, almost weary, with no apparent threat. Anakin laughed humorlessly, continuing his approach. "You say that because you feel my power? Because you realize you can't defeat me?" His confidence was absolute, fortified by years of victories and the certainty that he was the chosen one. Vader remained motionless, his black cloak trailing on the ground around him. "I sense more than you know, Ani." The words struck Anakin like lightning, causing him to stop in mid-stride. Ani. Only a few people in the entire galaxy called him that. His mother, Padme, occasionally Obi-Wan at times. How dare this monster use that name? "How do you know that? Who told you that name?" Anakin asked, his voice low and dangerous, his saber trembling slightly in his hand as his rage grew. Vader took a step forward, his mechanical breathing continuing its steady, disturbing rhythm. "Because we are one. I am you, Anakin. I am what you will become." The words were impossible, absurd, but they carried a weight of truth that resonated through the Force. Anakin looked at the mask, at the armor, at the darkness that emanated from that being, and something inside him refused to accept it. "No, you're lying." He attacked with all his strength, his saber cutting through the air in a brilliant arc meant to split Vader in two. The Sith Lord blocked with his own red saber, and the battle began in a whirlwind of light and fury. Vader was more experienced, his movements economical and precise, each strike calculated with decades of combat. But Anakin was faster, stronger, his young body responding to the commands of the Force with an agility that Vader could no longer match. They danced across the hangar, their sabers creating patterns of blue and red light, the sound of their blades clashing echoing like thunder. Anakin channeled all his anger, all his confusion, all his fear into each blow, pushing Vader further and further back. He spun and attacked, his saber cutting through Vader's defense and striking the side of his mask. There was a shower of sparks and the sound of metal breaking. Vader staggered backward, his lightsaber falling from his hands, and his damaged mask began to reveal what lay beneath. Anakin moved in, ready for the final blow, but then he saw the face. It was horrible, a mass of burned and scarred flesh, almost unrecognizable as human. But there was something in the yellowed eyes, something in the contours of what remained of the face, that was undeniably familiar. Anakin saw traces of himself in that ruin, as if he were looking at a distorted and destroyed reflection in a broken mirror. His saber shut off without him noticing, his hand falling to his side as the horror set in. "No," he whispered, taking a step back. "This can't be true." Vader remained on the ground, his breathing more difficult now with his mask damaged, but his eyes fixed on Anakin. "What happened?" Anakin asked, his voice breaking. "What happened to her? To Padme?" He needed to know, needed to understand how it had come to this. Vader closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was a depth of pain in them that made Anakin want to look away. "Your nightmares have come true. She died in childbirth, as did your son. It was all for nothing." Each word was a knife to Anakin's heart, confirming his worst fears and turning them into an inescapable reality. His legs nearly gave way, but he remained standing through sheer force of will. Vader lowered himself onto one knee, still staring at Anakin. "But now you have a new chance. Join me. Together we can defeat Palpatine and rule the galaxy." The words took a moment to register. "What? Palpatine?" Vader nodded slowly. "He is the Emperor now, the Sith Lord who orchestrated everything. He deceived us, corrupted me, destroyed the Jedi. But together, you and I, we can bring him down." Anakin took a step back, then another, his mind struggling to process all the revelations at once. Palpatine, the kind man who always supported him, the Chancellor who trusted him when the Council did not, was a Sith Lord? The Emperor of an empire that had destroyed the Republic? Padme was dead? His son was dead? But then who was Luke Skywalker? The pieces began to fit together in his mind, but they were so impossible that he refused to put them together completely. He began to shake, not from fear, but from an absolute overload of emotion and information. The force around him began to react to his inner turmoil, objects in the hangar shaking and levitating. A whirlpool began to form around him, a vortex of pure energy that distorted the air and caused the lights to flicker. Vader reached out. "Anakin, no!" But it was too late. The whirlpool engulfed Anakin completely, and the last thing he saw was the distorted face of his future self before everything dissolved into white light. When the Force whirlpool finally deposited him back on Padme's balcony, Anakin fell to his knees, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to process everything he had witnessed. He stared at his open palms, turning them repeatedly in the starlight, expecting to see Vader's black, mechanical gloves, expecting to feel the pain of the burns that covered that destroyed body. But his skin was intact, young, still able to feel the cool night breeze. The relief he felt lasted only a moment before he was engulfed by a wave of horror so deep it made his stomach churn. He had seen his own face, deformed and burned beneath that mask. He had felt the absolute darkness that emanated from that being who bore his name. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, the hero of the Republic, had become Darth Vader, a monster who served a tyrannical empire and had contributed to the destruction of everything he swore to protect. Tears began to stream down his face as he relived every second of that fight. Every word Vader had said, every detail of that armor that was more prison than protection. He had become exactly what he feared most, a slave again, but this time a slave to darkness, hatred, and a Sith master who had manipulated him from the beginning. The nausea came in waves as Anakin remembered the mechanical breathing, the artificial sound that kept Vader alive because his own body had been destroyed beyond repair. He thought about how he had gotten to that point, the choices he should have made, the moments when fear and anger had completely consumed him. Padme dead, the Jedi exterminated, the Republic transformed into an empire, and all because of him, because of his weakness, his inability to let go, his arrogance in believing he could control the darkness. Anakin placed his hands over his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as the magnitude of his future fall crushed him. He had fought against himself, he had seen the ruin he would become, and that image was burned into his mind like a brand. But then, through the darkness of his thoughts, a light began to shine. He had seen the future, yes, but he had also been given something precious, the chance to change it. He now knew who the real enemy was. He knew the traps that awaited him. He understood the consequences of every wrong choice before he even made them. Anakin slowly lowered his hands, his breathing steadying as a steely determination replaced his despair. He would not become that monster. He would not allow that future to come to pass. The Force had given him a vision, a warning, and he would use that knowledge to forge a different path, one where Padme would live, where his son would grow up in peace, where the Jedi would remain the guardians of the galaxy. He found Padme still sleeping peacefully in bed, her swollen belly visible even under the sheets. Tears began to stream down Anakin's face as he approached, kneeling beside the bed and gently touching her cheek. She was alive, warm, breathing. It wasn't too late. Padme stirred, slowly opening her eyes and focusing on Anakin kneeling beside her with tears in his eyes. "Ani, what happened? Are you okay?" Her voice was hoarse with sleep but laden with immediate concern. Anakin embraced her carefully, burying his face in her hair and inhaling her scent, anchoring himself in the reality of her presence. "I love you, Padme. Nothing will happen to you. I swear on everything I am. I will protect you and our baby." She hugged him back, confused but comforted by the intensity of his emotion. "I know, Ani. I trust you." But Anakin knew that trusting him wasn't enough. He had seen what would happen if he continued down the path he was on. He had seen the monster he would become, and now he knew who was really responsible for it all. In the days that followed, Anakin began to take action. He watched Palpatine with new eyes, seeing through the layers of kindness and concern to the manipulation beneath. He realized how each word the Chancellor spoke was carefully chosen to plant seeds of doubt about the Jedi Council, to isolate him from his companions, to make him increasingly dependent on Palpatine. When Palpatine revealed his true identity and offered Anakin the power to save Padme, the young Jedi feigned hesitation, feigned interest, letting the Sith Lord believe he had won over another apprentice. Palpatine smiled that predatory smile, his eyes already beginning to glint with the promise of corruption, and turned to gaze at the landscape of Coruscant through his office window. It was at that moment that Anakin attacked, his lightsaber igniting with a high-pitched whine and piercing the Chancellor's back. But Palpatine was faster than he appeared, spinning at the last second and blocking the blow with his own red saber that he had hidden in his sleeves. Bolts of Sith energy exploded from his free hands, forcing Anakin to retreat and defend himself. The battle that ensued was fierce and destructive, the two combatants using the Force and their blades in a deadly dance that destroyed antique furniture and cracked the office walls. Palpatine laughed as he fought, his face contorting between the gentle mask of the Chancellor and the true wrinkled, evil appearance of the Sith Lord. "You could have had it all, Anakin. Unlimited power, the ability to save those you love. Why throw it all away?" Anakin did not respond with words, only intensified his attacks, each blow more precise and powerful than the last. He thought of Padme, of his unborn child, of Obi-Wan who would sacrifice himself for him. All that strength, all that love, channeled through him, illuminating his connection to the Force in a way he had never experienced before. Palpatine sensed the change, and for the first time in decades, the Sith Lord felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: genuine fear. Anakin broke through his defense with a devastating attack, cutting Palpatine's saber in half and leaving the Sith unarmed. Lightning bolts continued to flow from Palpatine's hands, but Anakin defended them with his saber, protecting himself as he advanced relentlessly. "For the future you would destroy, for the Jedi you would murder, for the darkness you would spread," Anakin said, his voice resonating with power. "I bring balance to the Force." His lightsaber came down in a final arc, and Darth Sidious, the architect of so many tragedies, fell defeated, his millennia-old ambitions ending on the floor of the office he had used to manipulate the entire galaxy. The Jedi Council was shocked by the revelation that the Supreme Chancellor was the Sith Lord they had been searching for years. Master Yoda looked at Anakin with new eyes, seeing in him not only power, but wisdom that should not exist in someone so young. "Fulfilled, the prophecy was," Yoda said at a special meeting of the Council. "The Chosen One has brought balance to the Force." Obi-Wan placed a proud hand on his former Padawan's shoulder. "You always had it in you, Anakin. I always knew." Master Windu, who had been skeptical of Anakin from the beginning, stood up and bowed slightly. "You have proven yourself worthy of the title of Jedi Master, Anakin Skywalker. This council recognizes your accomplishments and your wisdom." Master Plo Koon tilted his alien head in agreement. Hadi Mundi added, "Saved the Republic, you have, and the Jedi as well." A few weeks later, Padme was taken to the Jedi Medical Center when her labor began. Anakin held her hand throughout the entire process, even when she squeezed it hard enough to hurt, even when the doctors tried to remove him from the room. He had seen the future where he wasn't there for her, where his paranoia and fear killed her. He wouldn't let that happen. Finally, a baby's cries filled the room, and a medical droid placed a small bundle in Padme's arms. "It's a boy, healthy and strong," the droid announced. Padme looked at her son's rosy face, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "Hello, little one. Welcome to the world." She looked at Anakin, her smile lighting up the entire room. "What shall we call him?" And in that moment, Anakin thought of the brave young man he had met at the space station, the boy who had extended his hand in friendship without hesitation. "Luke," he said softly. "Let's call him Luke." That's when it all clicked into place in Anakin's mind with crystal clarity. Luke Skywalker, the young Jedi he had met in the future, was his son. He hadn't died as Vader had said, but had survived, grown up, become a Jedi like his father. He had been in the presence of his own son without knowing it. And then, minutes later, when the doctors announced that there was another baby coming, when Padme gave birth to a girl with strong lungs and determined eyes, when Padme whispered Leia as she held the little one, Anakin understood completely. Leia, the princess of Alderaan whom he had helped rescue, was his daughter. His twins had survived in that alternate future, grown up separately, and the Force had brought them together at the most crucial moment. He had fought alongside his children without knowing it, had saved their lives as they would one day save the galaxy. Anakin looked at Padme holding the two babies, alive and healthy, and then at Obi-Wan, who had come in to meet his new honorary nephews, alive and smiling instead of old and sacrificed. The Force had given him an impossible gift, a chance to fix a broken future, and he had taken it. His nightmares were over, replaced by the reality of hope and love he held in his arms. The future was open now, no longer written in stone, but moldable by the choices he would make each day. And Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Master and the Chosen One, silently promised that he would make every choice count.